Hello there and welcome Internet to another episode of Smash JT. In this episode we're going to be talking about the best 10 SNES games ever created. And similar to when I was going through the NES catalog, I realized there's a ton of great Super Nintendo games that were made, so making a top 10 list for this was really hard. Alright, so remember all the legal mumbo jumbo here. My list is the definitive list, and your list is wrong. I'm just kidding, guys. Your list is probably better than mine, but that's what makes this so great, is having such a huge catalog and picking from so many amazing games. It really reminds you how great the games used to be back in the day. But without further ado, let's get started on this list. For number 10, I'm starting with one of my favorite fighting games ever created, the original Street Fighter II. The reason why this game was so amazing was back before the arcades were coming home, you have to go to the arcade and spend quarter after quarter after quarter on these games to have this incredible experience and play these new games at the arcade with people that otherwise would be impossible to do at home. And then along comes Street Fighter II and completely changes the landscape of the entire industry. The game started a slippery slope of putting arcades in America out of business because people could just buy the game and play it at their house. Street Fighter II released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo, and the success of it was credited for starting a fighting game boom during the 1990s, which inspired other game developers to produce their own fighting game franchises, popularizing the genre and setting off a renaissance for the arcade game industry in the early 1990s. By 1994, the game had been played by at least 25 million people in North America, at home and in arcades. And when the game released for the Super Nintendo, it cost anywhere between $60 and $80 at the time, but that was a small price to pay compared to what you'd lose at the arcades trying to play this game. Alright, and for number 9, I'm going with Donkey Kong Country, the original one. Now, a lot of you guys might say, man, Donkey Kong Country 2 was the best one, but in my opinion, this game was leaps and bounds above anything that came before it, and for that reason, it makes my top 10 list. Donkey Kong Country was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, and following an intense marketing campaign, Donkey Kong Country received critical acclaim and more than 9 million copies were sold worldwide, making it the second best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time. When Rare presented the first playable version of the game to Nintendo, Nintendo directed them to significantly reduce the difficulty levels, as they wanted the game to appeal to a more broad audience and felt the game's numerous secrets would provide sufficient challenge for the hardcore gamers. Which is really funny because the game is extremely challenging still, so I could only imagine what it was like before they put those changes in. Before I go to the next game, I want to quickly remind you guys this is my top 10 list, and most likely some of these games you won't have on your top 10 list because there's so many great games for the Super Nintendo. But for number 8, I'm going with SimCity, the original SimCity that came out before this for PC, but when it got ported to Super Nintendo, I'd never played any game ever in my life like this. It was the first game that I can ever really remember playing that didn't really have an ending. I mean, short of an arcade game, this game was just play it to grow your city as far as you could grow it, and when you're done with that, keep growing your city. It's not really much of an accomplishment beyond Megalopolis, but that was kind of the unique approach with this game. The point of the game wasn't to win, it was to enjoy the experience. Kinda like life? Released in 1991, SimCity was the first console game in the SimCity series, and one of the launch titles for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America. There are a few new features compared to the PC version, and the Super Nintendo version, the new advisor named Dr. Wright, who's a parody of Will Wright, the creator of the SimCity series, and as well as the Nintendo-related Easter eggs like Bowser Attack, replacing Godzilla on the PC, and the player's city can unlock a Mario statue. It's pretty cool. Alright, we're down to number 7 on my list, and I'm going with one of my all-time favorite adventure games, Super Metroid. It's been a long time since I played this game, but from what I can remember, it was an incredible experience. Actually, give me a minute here.
Six and a half hours later.
Wow, that game is awesome. Oh, that's right. Super Metroid is one of the most incredible adventure games you will ever play in your life. Released in 1994, Super Metroid received critical acclaim from the critics who praised the atmosphere, gameplay, music, graphics, cinematic elements. It's often described as one of the greatest video games of all time. Super Metroid became popular among players for speedrunning, and the gameplay and design influenced other games like Shadow Complex and Axiom Verge. The game was followed by a 2002 release of Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime, ending the series' 8-year hiatus. It would be great if Nintendo would get back to this series' roots. It's such a great game. For number 6 on my list, I'm going with the game that put the Super Nintendo on the map. And it actually debuted included bundled with the system. Hear that, Nintendo? Bundled with the system! Anyways, Super Mario World, one of the greatest platformer games ever created. This game broke new ground with how Mario moved, his new power-up items. Being able to use Yoshi was mind-blowing for the time. Paired with the amazing graphics and perfect play control, this game was a dream come true to new Super Nintendo owners. Released in 1991, Super Mario World centers on the quest of Mario and Luigi saving Dinosaur Land, spanning 7 different worlds. Super Mario World was a critical and commercial success, selling over 20 million copies worldwide, and also considered by many critics to be one of the best games ever made. Alright, we're down to number 5 right now, and a little sneak peek at my top 5, they're all role-playing games. The Super Nintendo was one of the greatest, if not the greatest system ever created for role-playing games. Right up there with the PlayStation 1, but I'd put the Super Nintendo just a notch above that. For number 5, I'm going with Earthbound. This game, when it came out, it was really received poorly to fairly lukewarm reviews. And that really surprised me, because when I rented it and played it, I was blown away. It was a completely different playstyle of role-playing game than I've ever been used to before. It changed my entire perspective of what a role-playing game should be and could be, and wasn't afraid to take chances and make it very different than the norm. And as time has gone on, this game has really developed a cult following and grown in popularity immensely compared to what it was back in the day. If you look for this on eBay, if you're not familiar, it's going for around $200 for just the loose cart right now, which is insane to me, but it's really a good game and I love it, so if it's worth that to me, it's worth that to other people too, I guess. Known as Mother 2 in Japan, Earthbound was released in 1995 in the United States. The game had a lengthy development period that spanned 5 years. Initial reviewers had little praise for Earthbound in the United States, where it sold half as many copies as it did in Japan. Critics attributed this to a combination of the game's simplistic graphics, the poor marketing campaign, and lack of market interest in the genre. In the ensuing years, a dedicated fan community spawned which advocated for the series. Starting in 1999, Ness, the series' protagonist, became a featured character in each Super Smash Bros. Series video game, which furthered public knowledge of Earthbound. Eventually, the game received wide critical acclaim and was deemed by many to be a timeless classic. Funny how that works. Alright, so for number 4, I'm going with the game that's probably number 1 on like 80% of the top 10 lists out there. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I love this game. It introduced new play mechanics, the hookshot, the boomerang, staples in the series that have followed a lot of the Zelda games since this. Released in 1991, A Link to the Past focuses on Link as he travels on a journey to save Hyrule, defeat Ganon, and rescue maidens related to the sages. Released to critical and commercial success, A Link to the Past was a landmark title for Nintendo, and is widely considered today to be another one of the greatest video games of all time. Alright, we're down to number 3, and for number 3 I'm going with 6. Final Fantasy VI. Well, Final Fantasy III in America. Beyond the absolutely gigantic scope of this game with the World of Light and the World of Ruin, the amazing end boss, the character development, the incredible music score, I don't even know where to begin with this game. There's so many amazing things about this game that it's really hard to top this one. Maybe as far as Final Fantasies go, Final Fantasy VII, but to me, they're right there with each other, honestly. Released in 1994, it's the 6th title in the Final Fantasy series. Set in the fantasy world with technology level equivalent to the Second Industrial Revolution, the game's story focuses on a group of rebels as they seek to overthrow an imperial dictatorship. Final Fantasy III was released to critical acclaim and is seen as a landmark title for the role-playing genre. For instance, it was ranked as the #1 role-playing game of all time by IGN. And for number 2, I'm going with one of the almost unanimous choices for best role-playing game ever made on the Super Nintendo, and maybe even ever. Chrono Trigger. Nothing like this has really been seen or matched since this came out, in my opinion, as far as time travel is concerned, and different worlds that are visited. And similar to Final Fantasy III, the character development, the music score, the storyline is incredible, and it's one of my favorite gameplay experiences that I've ever played. Released in 1995, Chrono Trigger's development team included 3 designers that Square dubbed the Dream Team. One from Final Fantasy, one from the Dragon Quest series, and one from Dragon Ball. Chrono Trigger was a critical and commercial success upon release, and like many of the games on this list, it's frequently cited as one of the best video games of all time. Alright, we're down to the number 1 game ever created for the Super Nintendo, but before I get there, I want to talk about a few honorable mentions that just missed my cut for the top 10. The very first one I want to talk about is Super Castlevania. To me, this game, to this day, is still the definitive Castlevania experience. Yeah, the PlayStation 1 was an awesome version, but this one holds a special place in my heart, because at the time, nothing like this had really been done, merging such an amazing platforming experience with great music score and cool end bosses. I absolutely love Super Castlevania, and it's a lot of fun to play even today. And another honorable mention I want to talk about real quick is the original F-Zero. The reason why this game was so amazing is because it blew any other racing game ever created before it out of the water. For a home console, I've never experienced such fast speeds and intense races, along with awesome music once again. Have you guys sensed the theme of how incredible the scores and soundtracks for Super Nintendo games were? It's incredible, really. And one more honorable mention that you guys probably thought was my number 1 game didn't make my top 10. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. This is a really good game, don't get me wrong, but the reason why it didn't make my top 10 is it was too easy. It was a lot of fun, but I blew right through it, and for what it's worth, I wish they had a hard mode on it. I feel like I would have enjoyed my time with it a lot more if I had to struggle through the game. Just a little bit. But a great game, don't get me wrong. Alright, so we're finally at my number 1 game. Have you guys guessed what it is yet? Secret of Mana is my number 1 Super Nintendo game ever created. Yes, better games have been made since this came out. I understand that. But it holds a special place in my heart because of the love and care that went into it by the developers, and how it was one of the first games in the Super Nintendo library that really caught my attention. It made me truly care about a storyline and what everything means and different paths that you can go your own route with. Without the random battles, it was all action. It was like Legend of Zelda on steroids, and I loved that. Secret of Mana originally released in Japan as Seiken Densetsu 2, loosely translated to Legend of the Sacred Sword 2, is a 1993 action role-playing game developed and published by Square. It's the sequel to the 1991 game Seiken Densetsu, released in North America named Final Fantasy Adventure for the original Nintendo Game Boy. Rather than using traditional turn-based battle system like contemporary role-playing games, Secret of Mana featured real-time battles and allowed for multiplayer. If you had the multi-tap, you could have 3 people together playing this game, and it was one of the most fun multiplayer experiences I've ever had in my life. I should also probably mention that the soundtrack in this game is my absolute favorite soundtrack to any video game ever made. It's incredible. So there you have my top 10 Super Nintendo games ever created, in my mind. Now I'm not going to ask if you guys agreed with the list or not, because I know you didn't. But I'd be interested to hear what you guys think was the best Super Nintendo game ever created. I posted the question on my Facebook page earlier and got some really cool responses, and the opinions some of you guys shared with me varied widely from what I was expecting. But that's what makes this so great, is everyone has a different favorite game for the Super Nintendo, and it's really cool to see what makes that your favorite game and the impact that it made on your life and how it helped you maybe get into gaming or deepen your passion for it. I don't know. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments what your favorite Super Nintendo game was. I'll talk to you later. Oh, one more thing. If you haven't already, make sure you click the thumbs up and subscribe. And if you haven't already seen the videos I made previously, I did a top 10 for my N64 and a top 10 for my original Nintendo. Thanks again for watching.